The rain came without warning that afternoon, turning the bright sky dark in minutes and the highway into a river of black asphalt and blurred yellow lines. Victoria Hale knelt beside her car in a red jumpsuit, now soaked through her hands, trembling as she wrestled with a lug nut that refused to budge. The flat tire mocked her, the jack slipping in the mud beneath her expensive shoes. Her phone showed no signal. Water streamed down her face, mixing with something that might have been tears. After a day spent in the courthouse reviewing case files that made her head pound, especially the one about a poor father named Noah Briggs, she felt herself breaking. Then headlights cut through the rain. A battered pickup truck slowed, and a man stepped out, his jacket already darkening with water. His eyes were kind but steady. "Can I help you with that?" That moment changed everything. Noah Briggs woke every morning at 4:30 in a one-room apartment that smelled faintly of mildew and the lemon cleaner he used to fight it. At 34, his hands bore the calluses of a man who'd learned that survival meant never saying no to work. He worked nights as a janitor at the community college, mopping floors, while most people slept, then spent his days doing repairs for anyone who'd hire him. Plumbing, electrical work, carpentry, whatever paid. His daughter Maya was 7 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark curls and a laugh that could light up their cramped space. She also had asthma that turned every cold into a crisis, every night into a vigil of listening for the whistle in her breathing. The inhaler on the nightstand cost more than their weekly groceries. Noah had sold his toolbox, the good one his father gave him, to pay for her medication last month. He'd sold his wedding ring before that, not that it mattered. His wife had left when Maya was 2 when the medical bills started piling up, and Noah's paycheck couldn't stretch far enough. She'd wanted a different life. He couldn't blame her, but he also couldn't follow. Maya was his life now. Every decision, every sacrifice, every hour of sleep he skipped, it was all for her. But the system didn't see it that way. A social worker had filed a report. Neglect, they called it. The apartment was too small. The food in the fridge too sparse. Noah had missed 2 parent-teacher conferences because he was working. The caseworker had caught him on a bad day when Maya's nebulizer was broken and he'd been up for 36 hours straight. She'd written down what she saw: a struggling single father who couldn't provide. The court date was approaching. Noah lay awake at night, staring at the water-stained ceiling, terrified they'd take her away. Victoria Hale had become a judge at 32, one of the youngest in the county. People called her brilliant, meticulous, fair, but firm. She'd built her career on the principle that the law existed for a reason, that emotions clouded judgment, that the facts on paper told the truth. She lived alone in a townhouse with white walls and minimal furniture, everything in its place. She'd learned early that caring too much meant hurting too much. When she was 16, her parents had died in a car accident on a stormy afternoon, much like this one sudden rain and darkness and a truck that didn't stop. She'd been in the car too, had walked away with scars she could hide under long sleeves. The ones inside took longer to hide. So she'd buried herself in law school in case files, in the clean logic of statutes and precedents. No mess, no risk, no loss. But lately something had shifted. The cases that came across her bench, especially the family court cases, they'd started to feel different. She'd see a mother's face crumble when she lost custody, or a father's hands shake as he signed away his rights, and Victoria would feel something crack inside the walls she'd built. The Briggs case had been sitting on her desk for 3 days now. Noah Briggs, single father, 34, 2 jobs, 1 daughter with chronic health issues. The social worker's report painted a picture of a man barely keeping his head above water. Missed appointments, insufficient food, inadequate housing. The law was clear, but something about the file bothered her. The details felt thin, copied from templates. The caseworker had noted the father's exhaustion, but not his effort. Victoria had spent the afternoon rereading it, feeling an unease she couldn't name. That afternoon, she'd stayed late at the courthouse, then started the drive home when the weather turned nasty fast. Both of them, Noah and Victoria, had been on the road that afternoon. One leaving a repair job early, anxious about the storm, and getting home to his daughter. One fleeing the weight of a decision that would break a family apart. Neither knew fate was pulling them together. Victoria had changed the tire herself plenty of times. She was capable, independent, prepared. But the lug nuts on this wheel had been over-tightened by some mechanic with an impact wrench, and her breaker bar wasn't enough. The rain had turned cold, the sudden storm dropping the temperature by 20 degrees. It soaked through her jumpsuit, plastering her hair to her face. She'd been out here 20 minutes. Her knees ached from kneeling on the gravel shoulder. Water pooled in the dimples of the asphalt, reflecting the gray sky back at her like accusing eyes. She tried calling roadside assistance. No signal. She tried flagging down cars. None stopped. And then she'd felt it, that terrible tightness in her chest, the one that came when control slipped away. She pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the wheel well and let herself admit it. She was scared. That's when the headlights appeared. The pickup truck was old, maybe 20 years, with a dent in the passenger door and a spare tire that had seen better days. It pulled onto the shoulder behind her, and for a moment, Victoria's mind went to all the true crime podcasts she'd listened to. Isolated highway, disabled car, stranger approaching. But when he stepped out, she saw his hesitation, the way he kept his distance, hands visible. "Ma'am, I don't mean to intrude. Looks like you could use some help." His voice was gentle, roughened by exhaustion, but sincere. Victoria stood wiping rain from her face. "The lug nuts won't budge." He nodded, glanced at her tire iron. "Mind if I give it a try?" She stepped back, watching as he knelt where she'd been kneeling. He positioned the breaker bar, braced himself, and threw his weight into it. The nut didn't move. He tried again, muscles straining under his soaked jacket. On the third attempt, something gave. He worked quickly after that, efficient and careful, loosening each nut before jacking up the car. Victoria found herself watching his hands. They were scarred, nicked, the hands of someone who worked with them. "You do this for a living?" she asked, just to fill the silence, to push back against the intimacy of standing in the rain with a stranger who was saving her. He smiled, a brief flash of warmth. "I do a bit of everything. Repairs mostly. Whatever needs fixing." He pulled off the flat tire, rolled the spare into place. "You heading home?" "Yes," she said. "You, Same. I've got a daughter, Maya. She's 7. I was finishing up a job trying to beat this storm." Something in his voice when he said his daughter's name made Victoria's chest tighten. It was love, pure and uncomplicated. The kind that made a man rush through work just to get home. "She's lucky to have you," Victoria said, and meant it. He looked up at her, then rain dripping from his hair, and she saw exhaustion etched into every line of his face, but also pride. "I'm lucky to have her." He finished, lowered the jack, tightened the nuts one more time. "That should hold. Get it checked soon, though. This spare's not meant for long distances." Victoria wanted to pay him, but he waved her off. "Just help someone else when you get the chance." He climbed back into his truck, gave her a small wave, and pulled away into the storm. She stood there for a moment, rain still falling, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. A reminder that kindness still existed, that people still stopped. She got in her car, started the engine, and drove home. She didn't know his name, didn't know she'd see him again in less than 24 hours. The courtroom smelled like floor polish and old paper, the kind of smell that never quite left, no matter how many times they cleaned. Victoria arrived early as always, her robe pressed, her notes organized. The Briggs case was first on the docket. She settled into her chair, glanced at the file one more time, and felt that same unease from yesterday. The opposing counsel was already there, a sharp-dressed woman from Child Protective Services who had a reputation for winning. And then the door opened, and Noah Briggs walked in. Victoria's breath caught. It was him, the man from yesterday afternoon. The one who'd knelt in the rain and fixed her tire with hands that were shaking from cold but steady in their work. He was wearing a thrift store suit that didn't quite fit, his hair neatly combed but still showing signs of stress. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept, and when his eyes met hers, she saw recognition flicker there too. But he said nothing. Just took his seat beside a public defender who looked barely old enough to practice law. Victoria forced herself to breathe, to center. This was a courtroom. She was a judge. Whatever had happened yesterday, it didn't matter here. The law mattered. The facts mattered. But even as she thought it, she felt the ground shifting under her. The CPS attorney stood, began her opening statement. She painted Noah as a man who meant well but couldn't provide. A father who worked so much he'd become absent. An apartment that failed health inspections. A child who'd been to the emergency room 4 times in 6 months. Each point landed like a hammer. Victoria watched Noah's face. He didn't flinch, didn't argue. He just sat there, hands folded on the table, taking it. The public defender tried to push back, talking about Noah's work ethic, his dedication, but the words felt thin against the weight of the CPS file. And then it was Noah's turn to speak. He stood slowly like a man going to his own execution. "Your Honor," he began, and his voice was the same one from yesterday, gentle and rough all at once. "I know what the report says. I know what it looks like. I work 2 jobs because that's what it takes to keep a roof over our heads and medicine in Maya's inhaler. Some nights I don't sleep. Some days the fridge is empty because I had to choose between food and her prescription. I've missed meetings because I was working. I've been late because the bus broke down, but I've never not once stopped trying." Victoria's hands tightened on her gavel. She remembered the way he'd checked each lug nut twice, the way he'd refused payment, the way he'd talked about his daughter with that unshakable love rushing to get home to her through the storm. "I love my daughter," Noah said, and his voice cracked just slightly. "She's everything. And if that's not enough, if trying my best isn't enough, then I don't know what else to do." The courtroom went quiet. Victoria looked down at the file, at the neat typed paragraphs that reduced this man's life to checkboxes and citations. Then she looked at him standing there in a suit that was too big and shoes that had been resoled too many times. Yesterday afternoon, he'd helped her without asking for anything. Yesterday, she'd seen who he really was. The recess was supposed to give everyone time to prepare for the next phase of testimony. Victoria used it to step into her chambers and close the door. She stood at the window looking out at the parking lot where puddles still remained from yesterday's sudden storm, trying to separate what she'd felt then from what she needed to do today. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Her clerk entered, carrying additional documents requested by the CPS attorney. Medical records for Maya Briggs, school attendance reports, utility bills. Victoria spread them across her desk and began to read. Maya had been to the emergency room 4 times in 6 months. Each visit was for asthma complications. Each time Noah had been the one to bring her in, had stayed with her through the night, had followed up with every appointment. The school records showed Maya's attendance was near perfect. When she'd missed days, it was always with a doctor's note. Her teachers noted she was bright, engaged, well cared for. One had written a margin note that somehow hadn't made it into the CPS file. Maya talks about her dad constantly. He helps with homework every night. The utility bills were a different story. Past due notices, disconnection warnings. But they were always paid, eventually sometimes just days before shutoff. Victoria could see the pattern. Noah paid the rent first, the medicine second, and everything else with whatever was left. It was the calculus of poverty, and it was breaking him. But the CPS report had focused on what was missing, not what was there. It had documented the empty fridge without noting the full medicine cabinet. It had counted the missed conference without acknowledging the 12-hour work shifts. When court reconvened, Victoria asked Noah to continue his testimony. "Mr. Briggs, can you walk me through a typical day?" He blinked, surprised by the question, then nodded. "I wake up at 4:30, get Maya ready for school at 6, walk her to the bus stop at 7. Then I head to my first job. I do repairs, whatever I can find. Plumbing, electrical, carpentry. I work until 3, then pick Maya up from the after-school program. We go home. I help with her homework, make dinner, give her the breathing treatment, put her to bed. Then I head to my night job at the college. I clean buildings until 3 in the morning. Sleep a couple hours. Start again. And the medical appointments. I take her to every one. Sometimes I have to bring her with me to jobs if I can't find someone to watch her. She sits in the truck and reads. She's good about it. The emergency room visits." His face tightened. "Asthma doesn't care about schedules. When she can't breathe, nothing else matters. I've called 911 3 times in the last year. Driven her in myself the other times. I know the nurses by name now." Victoria glanced at the CPS attorney, who was scribbling notes but looking less confident than before. "Mr. Briggs, last week you sold a set of tools. Why, oh, and I..." He looked down. Her inhaler ran out. Insurance wouldn't approve the refill for another week. I couldn't wait a week. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the stenographer's keys. Victoria felt something building in her chest, something that felt like anger but deeper. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Briggs. If I gave you $1 million right now, what would you do with it?" He didn't hesitate. "Buy a house with clean air, Get Maya a good doctor. Quit one of my jobs so I could be home for dinner every night. Not for yourself. Your Honor, I don't need anything for myself. I just need to keep my daughter safe. And that's when Victoria saw it, really saw it. This wasn't neglect. This was a man doing everything humanly possible with nothing. This was a father who'd been failed by every system meant to help him, now being judged by those same systems for not doing enough. Victoria called a recess and returned to her chambers with the file. She'd been a judge long enough to trust her instincts when something felt wrong, and everything about this case felt wrong. She started with the social worker's report. The visit had taken place on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, but Noah's work schedule showed he was always at his repair job until 3. Who had let the caseworker in? She read further. The caseworker noted minimal food in refrigerator and evidence of financial distress. But the inspection had happened 2 days before Noah's payday. She'd seen him at his lowest point and documented it as his norm. The more Victoria read, the more discrepancies she found. The report mentioned inadequate sleeping arrangements, but didn't note that the apartment was clean. It mentioned missed appointments, but didn't include the documentation Noah had provided showing most were rescheduled due to work conflicts. There were phrases that felt copy-pasted generic observations that could have applied to any struggling parent. Appears overwhelmed. Lacks adequate support system. Unable to meet child's basic needs. Each one was damning. Each one was also vague enough to be meaningless. Victoria pulled up the caseworker's other reports from the past year. She found similar language in 5 different cases. Same phrases, same conclusions. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of a form letter. She sat back in her chair, feeling a cold anger settle in her stomach. This wasn't an investigation. This was a checkbox exercise. A burned-out caseworker going through the motions, documenting poverty as if it were abuse exhaustion, as if it were neglect. Noah Briggs wasn't failing his daughter. The system was failing him. And Victoria had almost been part of that failure. Yesterday afternoon in the sudden storm, she'd seen who Noah really was. A man who stopped to help a stranger even when he was exhausted, even when he was rushing to get home to his daughter, even when he had every reason to keep driving. A man who talked about his child with a love so fierce it radiated from him. The file didn't show any of that. The file showed numbers and checkboxes and a narrative that fit the outcome the caseworker had already decided. Victoria knew she couldn't unsee what she'd learned, but she also knew she couldn't let her personal encounter bias her judgment. She needed more. She needed the truth that existed between the lines of this report. She made a decision then. She would recess the case for 1 week. She would order an independent investigation, and she would find out for herself what kind of father Noah Briggs really was. Victoria didn't tell anyone where she was going. On Saturday morning, she drove to the address listed in Noah's file, a low-income apartment complex on the east side of town. The building was old, sagging in places with paint peeling from the window frames. But the grounds were clean. Someone had planted flowers in the common area. She climbed the stairs to the second floor and found apartment 212. She stood there for a moment, questioning herself. This crossed lines. Judges didn't do home visits. They relied on investigators, caseworkers, official reports. But Victoria had spent the last 3 days thinking about Noah, kneeling in that storm, about the careful way he'd checked each lug nut, and she knew she couldn't trust the official version anymore. She knocked. Noah answered, wearing jeans and an old t-shirt, looking startled to see her. Your Honor. Mr. Briggs, I apologize for showing up unannounced. May I come in? He hesitated, glanced back into the apartment, then stepped aside. The space was small, maybe 400 square feet total. One room that served as bedroom and living area with a kitchenette in the corner and a bathroom behind a thin door. But it was spotless. The floor was swept. The dishes were washed. The bed was made with military precision. And everywhere Victoria looked, she saw signs of a child being loved. There was a corner set up as a study area with a small desk and a lamp, and Maya's school books stacked neatly. The walls were covered with drawings, crayon pictures of houses and rainbows, and stick figures holding hands. On the nightstand sat 2 inhalers, a spacer, a nebulizer, and a chart tracking medication times. In the kitchenette, the cabinets held more medicine than food, but what food there was had been organized carefully. Pasta, rice, canned vegetables, peanut butter. the staples of someone stretching every dollar. Victoria saw something else too. Hanging on a hook by the door was her red jumpsuit, the one she'd been wearing that afternoon in the storm. It had been washed and dried, the mud stains gone. "I was going to return it," Noah said quietly. "I found your name on the tag. Figured I'd get it clean first." Victoria felt something twist in her chest. Even in the middle of his own crisis, he'd thought to do this. "Mr. Briggs, can we talk honestly?" He nodded, gestured to the small table. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Victoria said, "Tell me about Maya." His whole face changed. "She's smart, scary smart. She wants to be a doctor someday. Says she's going to find a cure for asthma so other kids don't have to deal with it. She's kind too. Last week she gave her lunch to a kid at school who didn't have one. Came home hungry, but she didn't regret it. And the asthma. It's bad. She was born premature. Lungs didn't develop right. We manage it mostly. The medicine helps, but sometimes she has attacks anyway. Those times are the worst. You feel so helpless." The caseworker said your apartment failed inspection. Noah's jaw tightened. "She said the air quality was poor. But it's not the apartment. It's Maya's lungs. I scrub this place every week. I don't smoke. I don't let anyone smoke around her. I bought an air purifier with money I should have used for the electric bill, but the caseworker saw her nebulizer and decided the problem was the building." Victoria looked around again, seeing it differently now. This wasn't neglect. This was a father doing everything possible with impossible circumstances. "Why didn't you say all this in court?" "Because it sounds like excuses. I'm her father, I'm supposed to provide. And I'm not providing enough, that's on me." "No," Victoria said, the word coming out sharper than she intended. "That's on a system that pays poverty wages and charges a fortune for medicine. That's on a society that judges people for being poor instead of helping them." Noah looked at her, surprise flickering across his exhausted features. Before he could respond, the door opened. A small girl with dark curls bounded in, stopping short when she saw Victoria. "Dad, who's this?" "A friend," Noah said quickly. "Maya, this is Ms. Hale." Maya studied Victoria with the solemn intensity of a 7-year-old, then smiled. "Did you come to see my drawings?" Over the next week, Victoria did something she'd never done before. She investigated the case herself. She talked to Maya's teachers, who all said the same thing: Noah was involved, present, supportive. She talked to the neighbors, who confirmed he was a good father. She talked to the emergency room staff, who remembered Noah as the scared dad who never left his daughter's side. She pulled the caseworker's records and found a pattern of rushed assessments and copy-pasted conclusions. And she talked to Noah's employers. The college custodial manager told her Noah had never missed a shift in 2 years. The contractor he worked for during the day said Noah was the most reliable person he'd employed. "That man shows up even when he's dead on his feet," the contractor said. "He's skilled too. Could run his own business if he had the capital." Victoria compiled everything into a folder that grew thicker by the day. But the moment that changed everything came on Thursday evening. She'd gone to the county hospital to review Maya's medical records when she heard a commotion in the ER. A child was being rushed in, struggling to breathe. Victoria recognized the dark curls even before she saw Noah running alongside the gurney, his face gray with terror. She watched from the doorway as they worked on Maya, watched Noah's hands shake as he signed consent forms, watched him pace the hallway like a caged animal. When they finally stabilized her, when the doctor said she'd be okay, Noah collapsed into a chair and put his face in his hands. Victoria saw his shoulders shake. She saw a man who'd reached the absolute edge of what he could endure. She walked over, sat down beside him. He looked up, recognition dawning, but he was too drained to be surprised. "I couldn't get her inhaler refilled," he said hoarsely. "Insurance said it was too soon. I tried to stretch what we had. I thought we could make it until Monday. I thought wrong." "This isn't your fault. Isn't it? If I made more money, we'd have better insurance. If I had a better job, I could afford to pay out of pocket. If I was enough, my daughter wouldn't be in there right now." Victoria felt something break open inside her. She'd spent years building walls, years believing that distance and objectivity were the same thing as fairness. But they weren't. Fairness required seeing the truth. And the truth was that Noah Briggs was a good father in a system designed to punish people for being poor. "Oh, Mr. Briggs," she said carefully, When this case goes back to court, things are going to be different. I promise you that. He looked at her, hope and disbelief warring in his eyes. Why are you helping me? Victoria thought about the storm, about the tire, about the man who'd stopped when no one else would. Because someone helped me once, and because it's the right thing to do. That night, she went home and wrote her decision. Every word was backed by evidence. Every conclusion was supported by facts. But underneath it all was a simple truth. Noah Briggs was fighting a system that was stacked against him, and she was going to make sure he won. The courtroom was packed when the case reconvened. Word had gotten out that Judge Hale had ordered an independent investigation, and people were curious. Victoria took her seat, glanced at Noah, who sat with his public defender, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Maya was in the gallery, sitting with a neighbor, her small hands folded in her lap. Victoria's clerk called the court to order. The CPS attorney stood ready to continue her case, but Victoria stopped her. Before we proceed, I want to address some concerns about the initial investigation. She laid out what she'd found: the inconsistencies in the caseworker's report, the timing of the home visit, the lack of context for the observations, the failure to document Noah's efforts or Maya's well-being. The CPS attorney tried to object, but Victoria cut her off. I've reviewed this case thoroughly. I've spoken to teachers, neighbors, medical professionals, and employers. I've examined the evidence beyond what was presented in the initial report, and I've found that this case was built on incomplete information and biased assumptions. She turned to the caseworker, who was sitting in the back of the courtroom. Ms. Chen, you documented what you saw on one afternoon visit, but you didn't follow up. You didn't ask questions. You didn't investigate the context. You saw poverty and mistook it for neglect. The caseworker looked stricken. Your Honor, I was following protocol. Protocol isn't enough when a family's future is at stake. Protocol requires thoroughness, not just checkboxes. Victoria pulled out her folder, the one she'd compiled over the past week. Let me tell you what I found. Noah Briggs works an average of 90 hours per week. He has never missed a medical appointment for his daughter. He has never missed a parent-teacher conference that he didn't reschedule. His daughter is thriving academically and socially. Her teachers report she's happy, healthy, and well-adjusted. The only thing this family lacks is money. And last I checked, poverty isn't a crime. She read from statements she'd collected. Maya's teacher describing how Noah volunteered for field trips despite his work schedule. The neighbor who talked about Noah shoveling snow for elderly residents, even after working all night. The ER doctor who noted Noah's meticulous record-keeping of Maya's symptoms. Each piece of evidence painted a picture that contradicted the CPS file entirely. Then Victoria did something unusual. She called Maya to the stand. The little girl climbed into the witness box, her feet barely touching the floor, and looked around with wide eyes. Maya, Victoria said gently, can you tell me about your dad? Maya didn't hesitate. He's the best dad in the world. He makes me pancakes shaped like bears. He reads me stories every night, even when he's really tired. He taught me how to ride a bike and how to do fractions. When I can't breathe, he stays with me and tells me it's going to be okay. And he's always right. Are you happy at home? Yes, we don't have a lot of stuff, but we have each other. Dad says that's what matters. Victoria felt her throat tighten. She looked at the CPS attorney who was staring down at her notes, the fight gone from her posture. Your Honor, the attorney said quietly, in light of this new evidence, the state withdraws its petition. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Victoria banged her gavel once. Order. She looked at Noah, who was gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Mr. Briggs, this court finds no evidence of neglect or abuse. The allegations against you are dismissed. You will retain full custody of your daughter. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Furthermore, I'm ordering that you be connected with family support services, not because you need supervision, but because you deserve help. There are programs for housing assistance, medical expense support, and job training. My clerk will provide you with information. Noah's face crumpled. He pressed his hands over his eyes, shoulders shaking with relief, so profound it looked like pain. Victoria had presided over hundreds of cases. She delivered verdicts that sent people to prison, that dissolved marriages, that changed lives in ways both subtle and profound. But she'd never felt anything quite like this. The moment she said the words full custody, the moment Noah's face collapsed with relief, something shifted in her chest. She'd spent years believing that justice was about following the law, about maintaining distance, about treating every case as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a life to be affected. But watching Noah Briggs break down in tears, watching Maya run from the gallery to throw her arms around her father's neck, Victoria understood something new. Justice wasn't just about the law. It was about seeing people, really seeing them. After she dismissed court, Victoria sat in her chambers for a long time. Her clerk had left the paperwork on her desk, forms connecting Noah to support services information about housing assistance programs, contacts for medical billing advocates. She'd made sure everything was in order, that Noah would get the help he'd needed all along. There was a soft knock on her door. She looked up to find Noah standing there, Maya holding his hand. "Your Honor, Mom," he said, his voice still rough from crying. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Briggs. I was just doing my job." "No," he said firmly. "You went beyond that. You saw us. You looked past the paperwork and saw what was real." Victoria felt heat rise in her face. She wasn't used to this, to being on the receiving end of gratitude so raw and honest. "Mr. Briggs, can I ask you something?" He nodded. "That afternoon on the highway, when you stopped to help me, did you recognize me?" "Not until I saw you in court the next morning." "And you still helped me." "Of course. You needed help. Even though you were exhausted, even though you were rushing home to your daughter, even though you could have just kept driving." Noah looked puzzled, like he didn't understand why this needed explaining. "My mom used to say that how you treat people, when it costs you something, that's who you really are. It cost me 20 minutes. It cost you your whole case hanging in the balance. I know which of us made the bigger choice here." Victoria felt something in her chest crack open, something that had been closed for a very long time. "You're a good man, Noah Briggs, and a good father. Don't let anyone ever tell you different." Maya tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad, can I show Ms. Hale my drawing?" Noah looked at Victoria, a question in his eyes. She nodded. Maya pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and smoothed it out on Victoria's desk. It was a crayon drawing of 3 figures holding hands. One tall man, one small girl, and one woman in a red jumpsuit. "That's you," Maya said, pointing to the woman. "You helped my dad, and then you helped us. You're like a superhero." Victoria stared at the drawing, at the bright colors and careful details, and felt her eyes sting. "Can I keep this? Yes, I made it for you." Noah gently pulled his daughter back. "We should let Ms. Hale get back to work. Come on, kiddo." They headed for the door, but Noah paused at the threshold. "Your Honor, that afternoon on the highway, you said you were heading home. Did you make it okay?" "I did, thanks to you." "Good, I'm glad." They left, and Victoria sat alone in her chambers, staring at the drawing. She thought about the walls she'd built, the distance she'd maintained, the way she'd confused objectivity with isolation. She thought about her parents, about the accident that had taught her loss, about the years she'd spent protecting herself from feeling anything too deeply. But Noah Briggs had stopped in the storm. He'd helped a stranger when he had nothing to give. And in doing so, he'd reminded her that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was humanity. She pinned Maya's drawing to her bulletin board, right where she could see it every day. A reminder, not of this case, but of what justice really meant. It meant seeing people. It meant helping when it cost you something. It meant being brave enough to care. The sky had been clear all week, but on Saturday afternoon, clouds rolled in suddenly, the same way they had that day when everything changed. Victoria was working late, reviewing files for Monday's docket, when she heard the soft tap of rain against her window. She looked up, watched the water streak down the glass, and felt a strange sense of completion. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Your Honor, it's Noah Briggs. Got your number from the clerk. Hope that's okay. Wanted to update you. Started a new job this week. Full-time benefits, normal hours. I'll be home for dinner every night. Maya's over the moon. Thank you for making this possible." Victoria stared at the message, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She typed back carefully. "I'm so glad to hear it, Mr. Briggs. You and Maya deserve good things. Take care." She almost left it there, but something made her add one more line. "And thank you for that afternoon on the highway. You reminded me why I became a judge in the first place." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Maybe we could get coffee sometime. Maya wants to thank you properly. She's been practicing a speech. Victoria smiled, surprised by the leap in her chest. This crossed lines too. Judges didn't socialize with people whose cases they'd decided. But then again, she'd already crossed those lines. She'd investigated the case herself. She'd sat in a hospital hallway with him. She'd let his daughter draw her a picture that now hung on her wall. Maybe some lines were meant to be crossed. I'd like that, she typed. How's Saturday? They arranged to meet at a diner in town, a neutral space that felt less formal than coffee at a courthouse. Victoria told herself it was just follow-up, just making sure the family was settling in. But when Saturday came and she found herself changing outfits 3 times, she admitted the truth. She wanted to see him, not as a judge, not as the person who'd ruled on his case, just as herself. The diner was busy, full of families and couples and the smell of pancakes and fresh coffee. Maya spotted her first, waving enthusiastically from a booth. Victoria slid in across from them, and Noah smiled, looking more rested than she'd ever seen him. You look different, she said, then immediately regretted how that sounded. But Noah just laughed. I asked, I'm sleeping. Turns out that makes a big difference. They ordered breakfast even though it was 11 in the morning. Maya chattered about school, about her new friend, who also had asthma, about the science project she was planning. Noah watched his daughter with unguarded affection, interjecting, occasionally letting her lead. Victoria found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did. There was something about being with them, about seeing Maya's joy and Noah's peace, that made the world feel lighter. So, Noah said when Maya got distracted by the crayons the waitress brought, how does a judge spend her Saturday morning? Usually meal prep and case review. That sounds lonely. Victoria paused, fork halfway to her mouth. It is, she said, surprising herself with the honesty. I think I got used to it, convinced myself it was what I wanted. And now I'm not so sure. Noah nodded slowly. After Maya's mom left, I told myself I didn't need anyone else, that it was safer to be alone. But then Maya got sick one night, really sick, and I had to call 911, and the neighbor across the hall came over and stayed with me in the hospital. I realized I'd been so busy protecting myself that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be cared about. Victoria felt seen in a way that was uncomfortable and thrilling all at once. How did you move past it? I'm not sure I have, but I'm trying. Every day I try to be a little more open, a little less scared. Maya looked up from her coloring. Dad cries at movies now. He says it's because he's not afraid of feelings anymore. Noah's ears turned red. Maya, what? It's true, you cried at the dog movie. Victoria laughed, actually laughed, and it felt like light breaking through clouds. They talked for 2 hours, the conversation flowing easily from serious to silly and back again. When they finally left, stepping out into a day that had turned gray with the promise of rain, Noah walked Victoria to her car. I meant what I said in the text, he told her. You changed our lives. I don't know how to repay that. You already did. That afternoon on the highway, you reminded me that people can be kind for no reason. That help doesn't always come with strings. I'd forgotten that. Noah reached out, hesitated, then gently squeezed her shoulder. Maybe we both needed reminding. Victoria drove home as the first drops began to fall, windshield wipers keeping time with her heartbeat. She thought about the version of herself who'd knelt on that highway shoulder weeks ago alone and breaking in that sudden afternoon storm. She thought about the judge who'd almost ruled against Noah based on a faulty report, who'd almost been part of the system that crushed people for being poor. She wasn't those versions of herself anymore. Or maybe she was, but she was also becoming something new. Someone who stopped. Someone who saw. Someone who helped when it cost her something. The rain continued to fall, but it didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt like renewal, like the world washing itself clean. Victoria pulled into her driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet. Then she pulled out her phone and sent one more text. Same time next week. The reply came quickly. Maya had clearly grabbed her dad's phone. Yes, can you come to my soccer game? Victoria smiled. I'll be there. And she would be, not as a judge, not as someone trying to fix her mistake, but as someone who'd learned that the best way to honor a second chance was to show up. For others, for yourself, for the possibility that sometimes even in the middle of a sudden storm, someone stops to help. And sometimes that changes everything.